Recently I asked via the community tab of my channel if subscribers had any questions they would like me to discuss in a video. The response was so great that I will make 2 response videos. First of all, thank you very much for participating. Today we deal with the questions of the Middle Ages in general and the Wars of the Roses in particular. Next week the Tudors will be in the spotlight. Let's go! First question. The medieval period ended in 1485, but from when, what exactly is the start date? Before medieval we say the Dark Ages, yes, no. I left the dumb questions part out because the 2 questions are not dumb at all. And they concern a favorite topic of every historian I have met so far, periodization. I will try to not get too lost in this topic, but it is also the subject of the first video I published for a reason. What you need to know: terms such as the Middle Ages as we use them today were later coined by historians. Those who lived in the Middle Ages did not think that he or she lived in the middle of something. There is an exception based on the history of salvation, namely Paradise, Middle Time on Earth, Return to Paradise, but I leave it at the present time's use of the terms. The Middle Ages are usually set from 500 to 1500. The epochal boundaries were chosen because many major events in their vicinity seem to illustrate the change from one epoch to another. For the 500, the most important date is the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476. However, the formation of the new dominions which arose as a result of the migration of peoples is also significant. In the middle of the 6th century, a Roman emperor, Justinian, succeeded for the last time in bringing the city of Rome under his control. For the 1500, you have already mentioned an event: the Tudors came to the throne. Other major events include the Reformation, the fall of Constantinople, the invention of the printing press, and the discovery of America, of course. It is important to note that there are other models. For example, I know the approach of having the Middle Ages begin with Emperor Constantine because he legalized Christianity at the beginning of the 4th century. Another approach places the starting point of the Middle Ages at the year 800. The decisive factor is then the coronation of Charlemagne as emperor. It should also be noted that this model is Eurocentric. Coincidentally, it is still more or less true for Islam, but for example, for the natives of the American continents, the years 500 to 1500 were not the Middle Ages. To the second part of the question, the Dark Ages are commonly an unflattering synonym for the Middle Ages. This expression can also refer to other periods, but usually describes the European Middle Ages. There are 2 reasons for the name. First, relatively few written sources have survived. We don't know nearly as much as we would like. The darkness therefore refers to our level of knowledge. And then we did something stupid. We also concluded from the lack of written sources that people were uneducated. The idea was that they were lacking in this regard than the intellectual Romans, as well as the intellectual Greeks, and then the people of the Renaissance. This idea can still be found many times today, but has been corrected by historians again and again for a while now, and rightfully so. Secondly, many things happened during the Middle Ages that we morally reject in the 21st century. The Dark Ages thus functioned as a counter-term to the Enlightenment that followed in the 18th century, freeing from the darkness of ignorance and a time of seemingly unreasonable violence. Violence is rarely reasonable, but whatever. To the next question. Can you do a video on Anne, the Duchess of Exeter? She managed to get a divorce from her thug of a husband in an era where that was very unusual. I can make a video about her, and I will do a video about her, but it's interesting enough as a topic to make a classic documentary on my channel. So I will do that and leave it at that here right now, because otherwise it will blow up the entire answer video. I hope That's okay. To the next question. How did Cecily Neville react to Richard taking the throne? Did she ever say anything about this? Unfortunately, there is no direct reaction that has been handed down. We therefore must interpret her behavior, and this is also difficult because we know about two processes that are opposed to each other on this issue. First, Cecily had Richard use her London house Baynard's Castle in the days leading up to his ascension. This indicates support. However, she stayed away from her son's coronation, and this became a pattern. She withdrew into private life. For comparison, she had been intensively involved in Edward's reign. There could be no question about that. She also did not mention Richard in her will. However, she wrote it at a time when Henry VII had been sitting safely on the throne for years. My personal interpretation is that Cecily didn't want to have any part of it. She put in enough effort to make sure her own name wouldn't be dragged into the dirt. Allegedly, it was considered to deny Edward IV's legitimate birth, which is said to have failed due to her resistance. Only a single letter from Richard to his mother has survived from the time when he was king. He wrote it in June 1484, and Richard asked her to hear from her more often for his comfort. In May 1485, the two spent a few days together. It was the only time they saw each other in the days Richard was king. Polydor Virgil reports that she didn't like Richard. He was a Tudor historian. Accordingly, this admission should be assessed with caution. In any case, Richard was her last remaining son after all. We should remember that Cecily was already 68 years old when the events took place in 1483. I do not consider it impossible that she had decided for herself that her active role should end after the death of Edward IV, no matter what. The fact that Richard reached for the crown may not have changed the decision. I base this on the fact that she remained a private person under Henry VII. She lived peacefully and only returned to court on the occasion of important celebrations. However, the fact that she did not come to the coronation cannot be seen positively for Richard. We don't know of any disease or illness that could explain it away. Accordingly, either she didn't want to come or her son didn't want her there. In no case does it speak for a particularly pleasant relationship between the two on this day. To the next question. Who is the most secretive and ambitious son of York, and how is the relationship of Cecily Neville with her three boys? I am not sure if the first question can be answered fairly. Edward, as the eldest son, was pushed into a role early on in which he had no choice but to become king. Anything else would have meant the end of his family and his own. We don't know whether he really wanted the crown. I would therefore award the title of the most ambitious son to Richard with reservations. He didn't have to become king, but he decided to do so. George also reached for the crown but then gave up. The question of the most secretive son, on the other hand, can be clearly answered with Edward. He married his wife secretly and concealed it for months. It was probably not the only time that he at least made corresponding offers. To this day, we don't know for sure whether there really was a pre-contract with Eleanor Butler. Richard would only be a competitor in this question if he had actually planned the events of 1483 well in advance. With Edward we know for sure, with Richard we can only speculate. George was not that great in keeping secrets. And Cecily again. Cecily's relationship with her sons was distant but good, and it was only distant because this were the Middle Ages and the kids left the household of the parents early on. And a good relationship was true for everyone. Edward named his second oldest daughter Cecily to honor his mother. For comparison, he never named a daughter Jacquetta. Cecily had convinced George to rejoin his brothers when he was allied with Warwick. Richard wanted more letters from her because they gave him comfort. Of course, the question arises as to how George's execution affected her relationship with Edward and also with Richard, who is not known to have tried to stop it. The unsatisfactory answer is, we don't know. There's nothing that can tell us about it. It is plausible that it tore her heart apart, but even that is only speculation. In her will, she stipulated that she wanted to be buried with her husband and her second oldest son, Edmund. This was not unusual. Unfortunately, we therefore find no clue here either. However, the fact that she mentioned Edward prominently in her will shows that she was proud to have been the mother of this king until the end. I don't think we have enough sources to fundamentally doubt any of Cecily's relationships with her sons. And the last question for today. Elizabeth was crowned queen, therefore she has to be married to Edward. Why would Richard question that? Why Richard III openly questioned the marriage from June 1483 onwards, we don't know if he did it before, can probably be answered with politics and power. He had to justify why he was crowned king instead of Edward V, therefore he needed a lever to exclude Edward and his younger brother from the succession. The marriage of the parents was the easiest way to do this. The coronation as queen was no obstacle, as it took place under false assumptions if we follow this logic. Edward should not have crowned Elizabeth. The fact that he did was no longer a problem in June 1483 as he was dead. With him, Elizabeth's title as queen consort died. Now she was the queen dowager. The following is completely my personal interpretation. For example, in Titulus Regius, the law that legitimizes Richard's rule, witchcraft is repeatedly mentioned. This was supposed to eliminate such arguments. Elizabeth must have bewitched Edward so that he would crown her queen. Richard's own marriage was canonically contestable, nevertheless he attacked his brother's marriage. For me, this is proof that it was a question of power in which arguments only served as a fig leaf. I hope I answered the questions to everyone's satisfactions. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe, and bye for today.